Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. This is the end of my series of self-defense handgun cartridges. And I've kind of saved the oddballs for last. I'm talking here about the 4 calibers, 41 Magnum, 44 Special and Magnum, 45 ACP using moon clips in a revolver, and the 45 Colt. Back when wheel guns filled the holsters of most U.S. police officers, some of them felt the need for more power than the .38 Special or even the .357 Magnum. Now, the number of cops out there carrying revolvers chambered for a round to begin with a 4 was never large, not in my experience, but they did represent a percentage that's worthy of note. In the Wild West, the most common sidearm caliber was the .44. Most commonly carried in a variation of the Colt single-action Army revolver called the Colt Frontier 6-shooter, or by its nickname, the Peacemaker. That particular .44 was the .44 WCF, Winchester centerfire, used 40 grains of powder and launched a .427 to .429 bullet, so really that's where the .44s started out being a lot closer to .43 caliber. Now, the .44-40 was introduced in 1873 in the Winchester Model 1873 lever-action rifle. So it did not start out as a handgun cartridge. It's the 1873 Winchester, the gun that won the West. And there was a smaller version of it brought out called the .38 Winchester centerfire, or .38-40, which used a .40 caliber bullet. Gee, the first 10 millimeter. But the .44 bullets were a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and bigger was unquestionably better in those days. Everyone agreed on one thing: if you want more power, you need bigger bullets. Light, fast bullets had not come on the scene, and would not be on the scene for a good many years. The bullets were relatively soft lead. They always had a flat point to some extent, some with a large flat, some with a small. And we now know that that flat point has a kind of a slapping effect. Dr. Marty Fackler, the guy who invented the whole field of terminal ballistics and the use of the 10% gelatin test, he said a flat-nosed bullet slaps that gelatin hard and it kind of shoves that energy out sideways and really does more damage than a round-nosed bullet that just kind of pushes the tissue out of the way. And even when a hollow point expands, it's typically a kind of a smooth, rounded bullet. Doesn't have that flat shock effect of that initial hit of a flat point. Now, the even bigger .40 caliber Colts were the true single-action Army models issued to the Army, and again, 1873 design. They used a cartridge properly called the .45 Colt. Now, a lot of people call it the .45 Long Colt. It is not the Long Colt. It never was, because there was never a .45 Short Colt. There were shorter .45 caliber revolvers. Cartridges, however. Now, the Smith & Wesson Schofield revolver of the same era used a cartridge that was a bit shorter and lighter loaded than the .45 Colt. Now, the .45 Schofield round worked fine in an 1873 Colt single-action Army, but the Army round was too long to fit into the Schofield, and there were a few Army units who carried the Schofield revolver. And that created a logistic problem over the years. So to solve the problem of two .45 rounds that wouldn't interchange in the revolvers, the Army showed a little logic, which they do on occasion, and they standardized a new Army revolver cartridge called the M1887 military ball cartridge. It was essentially the shorter .45 Schofield round. It had a slightly smaller diameter rim, closer to what the Colt had, and it was to be used in both the Smith & Wesson and the Colt revolvers. So the big .45 was the Army revolver, but the .44 centerfire, Winchester centerfire, was typically the bigger bore of the rest of the people out on the frontier. Now the 4440, because it was first brought out in a rifle and subsequently chambered by Colt and other companies in their revolvers, this gave frontier users a huge advantage. They could use the same ammunition in both their sidearm and their rifle. I guess really that makes the 1873 Winchester lever action the first pistol caliber carbine, which has become a little bit of a rage again in our country. It's not a true, more powerful rifle. Winchester did that in what they called the model 1876 Winchester, a longer stretched action of the 73 that handled longer black powder rifle cartridges. 76 was never a really big success. Winchester made quite a few of them. Theodore Roosevelt was a lover of the 1876, but it never had the popularity to even come close to the 73. And the 73 and 76 both had a kind of a weak action. It had a toggle link in there hidden inside the action. And that would not stand a lot of rearward pressure. So the very largest black powder rifle cartridges, and especially when we started to get into the smokeless era, those actions could not handle the larger, more powerful cartridges. So the 76, the rifle size, was replaced with the 1886 Winchester lever action, designed by John Moses Browning. And then a little later, the pistol caliber carbine came out as the 1892. Still chambered in 44 WCF and 38 WCF and those same cartridges. And now we see that 1892 especially being chambered in 357, 41, 44 Magnum, 45 Colt. So a true pistol caliber carbine. Another cartridge of the Old West, even older, was the 44 Smith & Wesson American round. Brought out in 1869, it's used in the Smith & Wesson Model 3 revolver. This was the first round to use internally lubricated bullets. Most of the other cartridges before that, there was a step heel. The heel went into the cartridge case. The full diameter of the bullet essentially matched the diameter of the case, and the lubrication was on the outside. So they got dirtier. They were just not a great design. And the 44 American was really the first modern internal lubrication bullet. Wyatt Earp carried a Smith & Wesson chambered for the 44 American at the gunfight at the OK Corral. Now, as time went on, the 44 American was lengthened with a larger charge of black powder, and it became the 44 Russian caliber, also used in the Model 3 Smith & Wesson revolver. Eventually, over 130,000 of those Model 3s would be made in 44 Russian for the Russian military. In 1907, the Russian case was lengthened still further, and it was loaded with smokeless powder, one of the first smokeless powder cartridges. And Smith & Wesson called it the 44 Special. Now, the Special case could have produced power levels like the 45 Colt or the 45 Schofield with the smokeless powder, but it did not approach the power of those old black powder cartridges. It was loaded lighter for reasons we'll probably never know. They decided to keep the powder level down equal to about the power of the 44 Russian black powder cartridge. So the Special had a lot of potential, but it was not realized in the factory ammo at the time of its introduction. So that 44 Special round eventually became chambered in a lot of different revolvers, including the Colt Single Action Army. And you probably know the rest of this story, that a cowboy hunting guide gunwriter by the name of Elmer Keith in Idaho decided that that 44 Special could do a lot more than it did with factory ammo. So he became the guy who started hot rodding the 44 Special. And he wanted to find out just how much more power he could get from that. He used it in Smith & Wesson revolvers. He used it primarily in Colt Single Action revolvers. And his loads were hot. One of the problems he ran into is pistol brass at the time was called balloon-headed. It did not have a solid base at the bottom of the cartridge. The primer had kind of a bump in the bottom of the case to enclose the primer. That meant the cases would hold a lot more powder, and that was important with black powder, where they needed volume and they didn't have high pressures. But Eventually, revolver rounds were made to have a flat bottom that was much, much stronger. They added that much more brass on the bottom to bring it up to the primer level. Reduced the capacity, but made the rounds much, much stronger. And that happened during the time frame when Elmer Keith was hot rodding the 44 Special. So eventually had to back his loads down a little bit simply because there wasn't as much volume in there for powder. But he was pushing 245, 250 grain bullets way beyond what anybody had done before in a 44 Special. He started lobbying the gun companies and lobbying the ammunition companies, and he said, you need to make a Magnum version of this 44 just the way you did with the 357 Magnum being a Magnum version of the 38 Special. And Elmer Keith was kind of in on the development of the 357 to begin with. So Remington decided to make the ammunition, and at the same time that Smith & Wesson agreed to make the revolvers. The big N-frame Smith & Wesson double-action revolver was chosen. Metallurgy had reached the point where the cylinders and the barrels could be much stronger than the softer steel they had used before. They made the case about 1/8 of an inch longer so that the Magnum could not fit in a 44 Special revolver and blow it up. And we had the 44 Magnum. So the 44 Magnum was standardized on December 15th, 1955. I was just over 3 months old. That was a very good year. The Colt Python was also born in 55. A very good year. I have been known on a few occasions in my youth to carry a 4-inch Smith & Wesson Model 29 44 Magnum revolver on duty. It was loaded with my custom 44 Special hand loads because the 44 Magnum loads were far too violent to try to control in rapid fire. And they were probably going to punch through 1 or 2 or 3 people to endanger the little girl down the street in the playground. So I knew better than that. And I probably just did it because of the Dirty Harry movies. But, you know, in one of those movies, even Dirty Harry had admitted that he used 44 Special ammo most of the time. So the 44 Magnum became a hunting round. In my opinion, it's really too much for self-defense in an urban environment. Now, as a bear defense gun, it was the gun when I lived in Wyoming. If somebody was packing a pistol in the backcountry, it was probably a 44. Now, it's a 10 millimeter. So they've gone to a little bit less power, but more rounds, and a round that you can use more precisely. 44 it's a handful to shoot. But the 44 Special, I think, is an extremely well-balanced and almost ideal power level for self-defense. And the 44 Special is available in several factory loads that would be excellent self-defense loads. So the ammo companies agree with me, and if somebody wasn't buying those loads, they wouldn't be making them. Federal, Buffalo Bore, and Underwood all have loads with a lead semi-wad cutter hollow point, like the 38 Special load that I talked about in both 38 and 357 because it's one of the most highly rated 38 loads anybody has tested or kept records on. So taking that same bullet design, very soft lead semi-wad cutter with a hollow point in the nose, and putting that in a bigger diameter bullet, more mass, similar velocity, 44 Special should be one heck of a man-stopper. The Federal load has a velocity of only about 870 feet per second, so it's matching very closely to that 38 plus P lead semi-wad cutter hollow point load. That's a good round to carry. Now, there are only 3 makers who currently list what I would call concealable 44 Special revolvers. Charter Arms, a longtime maker of snub-nose revolvers, and for their infamous Bulldog 44 Special that was used in the Son of Sam killings a number of years ago in New York. They still make several variations of a 5-shot 44 Special snub-nose revolver. Taurus seems to have kind of an on-again, off-again production of a Model 445, which is also a 5-shot 44 Special. So I don't know if they're going to bring them back new again, but certainly there are used ones out there. In my opinion, if you want a 44 Special revolver to carry for self-defense, I think the best available 44 Special revolver to carry for self-defense right now is a Smith & Wesson Model 69. They come in a 2 3/4 inch barrel with a round butt, It is an L frame, so it's the intermediate size Smith & Wesson frame. Now, my late cowboy buddy out in Wyoming came to that conclusion towards the end of his life. He obtained a Model 69, the L frame. It's chambered for the .44 Magnum, and it is a handful with .44 Magnum ammo. But it's really not bad at all with good .44 special loads. So one of those Federal semi-wad cutter hollow point lead bullets at 870 feet per second from a Model 69. If you think revolvers make good self-defense guns and you think 5 shots will suffice with a quick reload, that Model 69 is kind of sweet. Now, in the weird way these caliber designations evolved, we know that the 44s are actually 43s. Above that, we get the 45s, and they are 45s. The 45 Colt of the original 1873 single-action Army was a very powerful cartridge with the black powder charge it had. It is still a serious self-defense caliber. In fact, the upper load end of the 45 Colt might even be more than we want. We could back that off a little bit to like those 45 Schofield energy levels and get perfectly good performance. And again, apparently the ammunition companies agree with me. They take it seriously, and they have several defense-oriented loads available, including my favorite, that lead semi-wad cutter hollow point versions. In the 45 Colt is loaded from Buffalo Bore and Federal. Again, the Federal load is the easier shooting one. It should just about duplicate the performance of that 38 Special Plus P lead load, but in a bigger format with more mass. That should be a man-stopper. 45 Colt carry revolvers? I don't know of any. These are big belt guns, better suitable for uniformed wear or for hunters. Now the 41 Magnum, another creation of Elmer Keith. It saw some use in U.S. police circles. It was introduced in 1864. To my knowledge, the only major police agency to adopt the 41 Magnum as a duty sidearm was San Antonio Police Department. And I don't think they used it for a lot of years before they moved on to their next choice. Now, Elmer Keith suggested originally that there be a 41 Special and a 41 Magnum, very much like the 38 Special 357 Magnum for police use. And he thought the Special would be suited for police duty use. The 41 Magnum would be a hunting handgun almost as powerful as a 44 Magnum. The 41 Special never happened. It simply came out as a 41 Magnum. But Remington, who originally produced the 41, they did produce a lighter lead semi-wad cutter load for it. But even that was a pretty substantial load. I played with the 41 for a number of years. I had a bunch of friends here in my hometown that did as well. My records show that the Remington light load was still over 1,000 feet per second from either a 4 or especially from a 6-inch barreled revolver. Now, if someone had loaded a 200 grain lead semi-wad cutter hollow point at about 850 feet per second for the 41 Magnum, it might have taken off. And we might still see some police departments firing that into the 80s before the real changeover to semi-automatics took part. As it was, in my hometown here in Illinois, 20-man police department more or less, I can recall 5 back in my day when the officers had to buy their own pistols and there was really no restriction on what caliber they had. I can think of 5 guys on that department that at one time or another carried a 41 Magnum. And one of them in particular carried it clear to the end of his career. Some of them had 6-inch revolvers. Some of them had 4-inch, to my notion, the nicest self-defense style revolver ever built for the 41 Magnum was the Smith & Wesson Model 58. That was a 4-inch fixed sight, the equivalent of a Model 10 in 38. And I've got one of my buddies, he had the Model 58. He had sent it to Magnaport for a really slick action job, Magnaporting on the barrel. Orange front ramp, and this thing was sweet. And I have a standing offer, and I need that like I need another hole in my head. But if he'll ever sell me that 58, I'll buy it. I like that revolver. There are currently no self-defense suitable loads or self-defense suitable revolvers being made today for the 41 Magnum. 41 Magnum is dying out. That's a shame. It's a nice round. And there's another 45 beyond the 45 Colt, and that's the 45 ACP used in revolvers. They were first used in revolvers in the model 1917 Colt and the model 1917 Smith & Wesson. During World War I, the United States Army could not get 1911 semi-auto pistols produced fast enough to meet their needs. So both Smith & Wesson and Colt were asked to take their large frame revolvers. They built them, I believe, with a 5.5-inch barrel. I had a Colt at one time. They were chambered for the 45 ACP. Now you can put the 45 ACP cases in that cylinder and they headspace on the mouth and they will fire just fine. The problem is when you hit the ejector rod, nothing happens because they're rimless cases. So when Smith & Wesson, I think, was the first to develop this, they came up with what they called a half moon clip. So both the Smith & Wesson and the Colt 1917s used these half moon clips. These are little steel clips that the cartridge cases snap into and snap out of. I mean, they're not too hard to get in there, but they're not super easy. 2 of them made up a 6-round cylinder. And since they went in there and went into the cylinder in this fashion, now the ejector rod will knock these things out. But they use the same cartridge as the 45 semi-auto, the 1911 that the military was using. So it was actually a pretty good way around arming a lot of military people with the same caliber, using the same ammunition, but in revolvers because they simply couldn't produce enough semi-autos to meet the demand. Nowadays, we've seen that these half moon clips have been converted into full moon clips, so you can actually have all 6 loaded at once, throw them in as kind of a ring. I keep these in my little collection of ammo because my dad ended up with a box of ammo from a remodeling job he did at someone's house. And the little old lady said, yeah, my husband had all that stuff. She goes, you know anybody that deals with guns, take it and give it to him. So my dad gave me this box of assorted junk ammo. And I picked up these 2 half moon clips and I looked at them and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. They're cupro nickel, that's silver colored projectiles that were used in both rifles and pistols in World War I. That was before we used gilding metal, which is copper based and copper colored, the standard that we have nowadays. So I saw these and I thought, gee, that's cupro nickel. Those are pretty old. And then I looked at the head stamp. USCCO, U.S. Cartridge Company. And the head stamp date is 17. That's kind of cool. There's 6 rounds and 2 half moon clips made to fit either the Colt or Smith & Wesson 1917 revolvers, and the ammo was made in 1917. That's kind of cool. So I keep those in my collection. There's really never been a concealable revolver made for the 45 using moon clips. If they made an end frame with a round butt, 2 3/4 or 3-inch barrel, it's going to be a big cylinder. It's going to be a big gun to lug around with you. But if you've ever seen Jerry Micklick, the noted competitive shooter, shoots a Smith & Wesson Model 25, which is 45 ACP using full moon clips. And I believe he made 12 rounds on a steel target in less than 8 seconds in one of his world record setting events. So he brings this revolver up and shoots it faster than I could ever shoot a semi-automatic for 6 rounds, opens it, knocks it out, pulls a full moon clip off of his belt and literally just throws it into the cylinder, because with these round nose bullets, and they chamfer those chambers pretty well, so they're kind of like a funnel, and he just threw that in there, closed the cylinder, and 6 more rounds, and the total run for 12 rounds was 8 seconds. That's fast. So a 45 revolver would be an awesome self-defense weapon. The problem is they're big and they're heavy. They're really not practical. Are any of the big 4 caliber revolvers rounds practical, or are they just nostalgia when it comes to being modern self-defense cartridges? I think the 44 Special in like the Model 69 Smith & Wesson I mentioned, I think that's viable. Wouldn't be hard to conceal. If you can live with 5 rounds and a quick reload, that's going to be a man stopper. So while all of these I would put into the reliable category as man stoppers, maybe even better than reliable, that would only be for somebody who's willing to learn how to use the revolver, and so many people just don't know how to use one nowadays. You need to use it quickly, accurately, effectively. If you want to master their use and you want to be a little old-fashioned and unique, then the 4s could work for you as self-defense. I mean, hell, even Indiana Jones was seen in one of the movies with a .45 ACP Smith & Wesson model 1917 revolver cut down to a 4-inch barrel. So from the old Frontier 4440 to the most modern 30 super carries, the United States has a long history of developing self-defense calibers, ranging from black powder loads to the most modern hollow point designs, and even the all-copper fluted bullets, the fluid transfer monolithics that may be the wave of the future. So this is my list. I think I've covered all the ones that are practical. I've had several people say, gee, are you going to cover this or are you going to cover that? There's only one other self-defense caliber that I've been asked to mention. I'm not going to name it. If there's something you'd like to see, send it in. Give me a comment, and if I see enough on that one caliber, I'll address it. I'm not sure if I like it as a self-defense cartridge yet or not. I've fired it, so I've got a little experience with it. But I really think from the 30 Super Carry and the 32 revolvers up to the 45 ACP in modern pistols, maybe even the 45 ACP in Colt in big revolvers. I think we have such a diverse choice in this country. I'm not sure we need anything new. I'm not sure we even needed the 30 Super Carry. But it's there, and it might have a niche. So like Mark Twain once said, you pays your money and you takes your choice. We have a lot of self-defense cartridges to use in our handguns. If you like light bullets, fast velocities, and high capacities, you got it. If you want big bullets, heavy bullets, slower velocities, we got it. And everything in between. I hope you've enjoyed this rundown of self-defense pistol cartridges. If you have, then I hope you will subscribe to my channel and keep watching. Give me a like, leave a comment. Folks, the point to all of this is to have you well armed and have you safe out on the streets. And the streets are getting darker as time goes on. This country's not headed in a good direction. Hopefully we're going to turn it around and take it in a good direction. But before that happens, a lot of you are going to need those self-defense pistols out there. So stay safe. Thank you for watching.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.